You found the message in a dead star's heart. It was not written on paper or etched in metal. It was a whisper woven into the fabric of space-time, an echo from a civilization long gone. They called it the Chronos Mandate. It was less a warning and more a final testament. The mandate spoke of an enemy unlike any you had ever conceived. Not a creature of flesh or machine of circuits. This foe was a predator of moments. They were called the Vora. They did not conquer worlds in the traditional sense. They did not glass planets or enslave populations. Their method was far more insidious. The Vora consumed time itself. A planet they touched would see its history vanish. Its future would wither into nothingness. The mandate was clear. This was not a war you could win with bigger ships or better guns. This was a war against the very flow of existence. You read the chilling final lines. They warned that the Vora were drawn to life. They fed on the potential of a species. Your own civilization, young and vibrant, was a feast waiting to happen. The message ended with a plea, a desperate hope that another race might find their words, and that you might succeed where they had failed, to stand against the eaters of eternity. Your first contact was not a grand meeting of ambassadors. There were no formal greetings, no exchange of culture or knowledge. It was a silent theft in the dark. A patrol squadron in the Orion Spur vanished. One moment they were reporting standard sensor readings. The next, there was only static. You sent a scout ship to investigate. They found nothing. No wreckage, no debris, no sign of a struggle. It was as if the squadron had never been there at all. Then the reports started trickling in from outer colonies. A freighter arriving at its destination minutes before it departed its origin port. A mining outpost where the workers aged a decade in a single day. These were not isolated incidents. They were skirmishes in a war you did not yet understand. The enemy was invisible, insidious. They were not destroying your assets. They were erasing their existence. A resource depot would be fully stocked 1 minute. The next, its records showed it was never even built. The loss was not in materials. It was in stolen seconds, stolen minutes, stolen hours. You realized the Vora were testing you. They were probing your defenses. They were tasting your timeline. Humanity was losing a war without ever seeing the enemy's face. You were bleeding moments, and you had no way to stop the hemorrhage. The true horror began to settle in. This was not a fight for survival. It was a fight for the right to have ever existed at all. The highest levels of your command structure convened. Panic was a luxury you could not afford. Desperation, however, was a powerful motivator. Your greatest minds were gathered. They were given a single directive: find a way to fight back. Find a way to turn the enemy's weapon against them. This was the birth of Project Hourglass. A plan so audacious, so contrary to the laws of star science, that it bordered on madness. The goal was simple to state, yet impossible to achieve. You would weaponize time itself. You would build a sword out of seconds. You would forge a shield from centuries. The project was top secret, its existence known only to a handful of leaders and scientists. The team worked in a hidden facility. It was buried deep within a moon that orbited a gas giant. They toiled against the clock, a clock the enemy sought to devour. The initial theories were wild. Some proposed creating localized time loops, trapping the Vora in a repeating moment for eternity. Others suggested temporal shields, bubbles of static time that the enemy could not consume. One scientist, a brilliant but eccentric mind named Dr. Eris Thorne, proposed something else. He argued that you could not defend against a predator of time. You had to become a predator yourself. You had to learn to hunt in the fourth dimension. You had to make the Vora fear the very concept they wielded. The first prototypes were beautiful and terrifying. They were not guns in the conventional sense. They were long, elegant lances. Forged from a crystalline alloy that shimmered with captured light, these were the temporal lances. They did not fire projectiles or energy beams. They fired a concentrated stream of accelerated time. A single touch from a lance could have devastating effects. An enemy ship's hull would rust and decay in an instant. Its crew would age into dust before they could even register the attack. The power was immense, but the control was dangerously imprecise. During an early test, a lance misfired. It struck a barren asteroid. The rock did not shatter. It eroded. It weathered away over millions of years, all in the span of a few seconds. The scientists watched in awed silence. They had created a weapon that could erase things from the present. It could force an object to experience its own distant future of decay. The ethical implications were staggering. But the Vora gave you no time for debate. Their incursions were growing more frequent, more daring. Entire colonies were now winking out of existence. Billions of lives erased as if they were never born. The temporal lances were your only hope, a desperate, frightening hope. You had built a weapon that mocked the universe's most fundamental constant. You could only pray it would not mock you in the end. It was time to show the Vora that humanity did not just live in time. You could now wield it. Your fleets were retrofitted. The temporal lances were mounted onto your most advanced starships. A new type of warship was born, the Chrono Dreadnought. The first major engagement took place in the Cygnus sector. A Vora fleet, a shimmering distortion in space-time, was detected consuming the timeline of a fledgling human colony. Your ships warped in, a silent, determined force. The battle that followed was unlike any in the history of warfare. It was a war of ages. Your dreadnoughts fired their lances. Beams of pure temporal energy crossed the void. Where they struck a Vora vessel, reality itself seemed to warp. You saw their strange, non-Euclidean hulls flicker. They aged, thousands of years in a heartbeat. Their energy signatures faded into the deep past. The Vora fought back with their own temporal distortions. Entire sections of your fleet were caught in pockets of slowed time. A cruiser might take a week to fire a single volley of its conventional weapons. A squadron of fighters would be frozen in mid-maneuver. Pilots could only watch as the battle raged around them at impossible speeds. It was a chaotic, disorienting ballet of temporal mechanics. You learned to think in 4 dimensions. Commanders issued orders that would be carried out yesterday. They targeted enemies that would arrive tomorrow. Entire battles were won and lost in the time it took for a single standard second to pass. It was a dizzying and costly way to fight. You were pushing the Vora back. But the universe was not meant to be bent in this way. You were winning battles, but you feared you might be losing the war for reality itself. During a lull in the fighting, they arrived. A single ship, impossibly vast and ancient. It was carved from a material that seemed to drink the light of stars. It did not announce itself with hails or threats. It simply was. On your view screen, a figure appeared. It was tall, slender, and its form was difficult to focus on. It seemed to exist in multiple moments at once. This was your first encounter with the beings known as the Elder Ones. They had watched civilizations rise and fall for eons. They were the silent librarians of the cosmos. Their message was not a greeting or an offer of alliance. It was a cryptic piece of guidance, a riddle wrapped in a paradox. The elder. One spoke in a voice that was not sound. It was a concept impressed directly into your mind. The river of time cannot be dammed, it said, only diverted. A current that is blocked will only grow stronger. It showed you images, a star collapsing under its own gravity, a new universe being born from the ashes of the old. It spoke of cycles, of cosmic balance. The Vora, it explained, were not pure malice. They were a natural force, a balancing agent against runaway futures. Your temporal weapons, your lances and dreadnoughts, were a disruption, an anomaly that threatened the grand cosmic equation. Then the elder. One offered a piece of advice. To defeat a shadow, it whispered in your thoughts, you must understand the light that casts it. It did not elaborate. It did not answer your frantic questions. The vast, ancient ship simply faded from your sensors. It left you with more questions than answers. Were the Elder Ones allies, or something else entirely? Was their advice a warning or a clue? You were fighting a war on a scale you could barely comprehend. And now a new mysterious player had entered the field. A player who seemed to hold the rules to the entire game. Your victory against the Vora suddenly felt hollow. You had mastered time, but you were still infants in the vast, unknowable ocean of the star science. The war took a toll that could not be measured in ships or resources. It was a cost in moments. The pilots of your chrono dreadnoughts, the brave souls who wielded the temporal lances, paid the highest price. The temporal energies they harnessed were not perfectly contained. They leaked. They radiated through the cockpits and command decks. With every mission, with every blast of their weapons, the crews were exposed. Each battle shaved years from their lives. A young pilot might leave for a sortie. They would return hours later, their hair flecked with gray, their faces etched with lines that did not belong. They were living their lives in fast forward. These temporal soldiers became a class apart. They were heroes, celebrated for their sacrifice. But they were also ghosts, men and women who were aging out of existence. They would have conversations with loved ones back home. For the family, it was a daily call. For the pilot, years might have passed between messages. Romances withered. Children grew up as strangers. It was a quiet, creeping tragedy. The pilots called it the time debt. They knew they were spending their own futures to buy the present for everyone else. Some accepted it with a grim resolve. Others joked about it to cope. At least we get senior discounts early, one quipped, his hands trembling with premature age. The humor was a thin veil over a deep, profound sadness. Humanity was winning, but its saviors were fading away like old photographs. Then the true crisis began. It was not a Vora attack. It was something far worse. A tear in the fabric of reality. Near your home system, near Sol. A wound opened in space-time. Scientists called it the anomaly. It was a temporal rift, a swirling vortex of chronological chaos. It was not consuming time like the Vora. It was erasing it, randomly, violently. Earth's history began to flicker like a faulty holovid. One day the pyramids of Giza were gone. The next, the Great Wall of China had never been built. Historical figures vanished from your records. Entire wars and empires were wiped from the collective memory of your species. It was a subtle, creeping erasure. You were not just losing your future. You were losing your past. The anomaly was a direct consequence of your temporal war. The constant bending and twisting of space-time had weakened its structure. You had hammered the anvil of reality too hard, and now it was beginning to crack. The Vora attacks seemed to lessen. It was as if they were watching, waiting. Perhaps they knew this would happen. Perhaps this was their ultimate goal, to provoke you into destroying yourselves. The anomaly was growing. It was slowly, inexorably drifting towards Earth. If it reached your home world, it would not just destroy it. It would unravel its entire four-dimensional existence. Every moment of human history, from the first spark of life to the present day, would be undone. Earth would become a planet that had never been. Faced with the utter annihilation of your history, you made a desperate choice. You could not fight the anomaly head-on. It was not an enemy you could shoot. It was a law of the universe coming undone. So you decided to run. But you would not abandon your civilization. You would build a fortress, a final bastion of hope. But this fortress could not be built in normal space. It had to exist somewhere else entirely. It had to be a place that time could not touch. You pooled all your resources, all your knowledge of temporal mechanics. You began the most ambitious construction project in human history. You would build a citadel outside of time. It was called the Time Citadel, a massive station built in a pocket dimension, a bubble of space-time that was carefully shielded from the temporal chaos of the main universe. Getting there was a feat in itself. Ships had to perform a precise and incredibly dangerous temporal jump. But once inside, they were safe. Within the citadel, time flowed at a normal, constant rate. It was an anchor in a stormy sea. Millions of refugees poured in. Scientists, soldiers, civilians. The last remnants of a species whose history was being devoured. The citadel was a marvel of engineering, a testament to your ingenuity and your will to survive. But it was also a cage, a gilded prison. You were safe from the anomaly, but you were also cut off from the universe. You had become a civilization in exile, an island of the present in an ocean of unraveling past. You had a fortress, but you had lost your home. Inside the sterile, controlled environment of the Time Citadel, you finally had time to think. Your science teams, shielded from the immediate crisis, began a new kind of research. They were not building weapons. They were trying to understand. They analyzed the Vora's temporal signature. They studied the cryptic words of the Elder Ones. They looked for a pattern in the chaos. Slowly, a new and disturbing picture began to emerge. You started to intercept faint, fragmented transmissions from the Vora. They were not battle communications. They were something else. Whispers from the void. These whispers were not meant for you, but your sensitive temporal instruments could just barely decode them. They were laments. They were warnings. The Vora were not conquerors. They were refugees. They were the last survivors of a future that was doomed to collapse. The whispers spoke of a future catastrophe, a great unraveling, an event so total, so final, that it would erase all of existence, all timelines, all possibilities. Their civilization was trying to prevent it. Their consumption of time was not a malicious act. It was a desperate attempt to slow down the march of causality, to prune the timelines that led to the inevitable, horrific end. They were not eating your past for sustenance. They were trimming the branches of history to save the entire tree. This revelation shattered your understanding of the war. You had seen the Vora as monsters, but they were acting to prevent a future you could not even imagine, a future your own actions might be accelerating. The revelation of the Vora's true motives sent a shockwave through the human command. The unified front against the enemy shattered. Your leadership splintered into factions. One group, the absolutists, argued that the Vora's motives were irrelevant. They had erased billions of human lives. They had pushed Earth to the brink. They were the enemy, period. The absolutists demanded a continuation of the war. They advocated for even more powerful temporal weapons. They wanted to destroy the Vora and their timeline completely. Another faction, the revisionists, argued for a different path. They believed that humanity had a moral obligation to understand the coming catastrophe. They suggested that you should try to open communications with the Vora. Perhaps an alliance was possible. Perhaps you could work together to face the greater threat. The debates grew heated. Accusations of treason were thrown. Friendships ended. The unity that had forged the Time Citadel began to crack. Your people were divided. Some saw the temporal lances as a symbol of your strength. Others now saw them as a mark of your ignorance, a monument to a war you had fought for all the wrong reasons. The moral weight of your actions came crashing down. Was it right to kill a species that was trying to save the universe, even if their methods were destructive? Could you condemn them for their choices when your own had led to the anomaly? The war had become a tangled knot of ethics and paradoxes. You were no longer fighting for simple survival. You were fighting for the very soul of your species. The fractured alliance was a mirror of your own fractured certainty. In the midst of the political turmoil, a small group of scientists and military strategists came up with a final, desperate plan. It was a gambit of cosmic proportions, a single decisive action that could either save everything or destroy it all. The plan was not to defeat the Vora in battle. It was to address the root of the problem. You would not attack their present. You would reset their past. The idea was to build a temporal bomb, not a weapon of destruction, but a weapon of creation. The bomb would not explode with energy. It would detonate with a focused burst of causality. It was designed to travel back to the Vora's distant past, back to a critical moment in their history. It would introduce a single, tiny change, a nudge to their timeline that would divert them from the path that led to the great unraveling. It was the ultimate gamble. The mission required a lone ship, a small, fast vessel capable of the most precise temporal jump ever attempted. It would have to navigate the chaotic energies of the anomaly. It would have to evade the Vora's temporal senses. And it would have to deliver its payload to a specific moment in a time that was not your own. The pilot would be on a one-way trip. There was no coming back from that far in the past. Commander Eva Rostova, the most decorated temporal pilot you had, volunteered. She was one of the oldest of the time-aged soldiers. Her life was already measured in mere months. She saw it as a final, meaningful act. To carry a bomb of hope. To reset not just an enemy's past, but the entire, tragic history of the war. Commander Rostova's ship, the solitary moment, made the jump. For a tense period, there was only silence. Then, the reports came in. The temporal bomb had detonated. The effects were instantaneous and surreal. You did not see a flash of light. You saw a wave of change ripple across reality. The universe seemed to flicker. For a moment, you saw things that were not there. Glimpses of altered timelines, echoes of what was and what might have been. On the view screen of the Time Citadel, you saw Earth. But it was not the Earth you knew. For a split second, it was a lush green world where humanity had never evolved. Then it flickered again. It was a world of crystalline cities, a timeline where your alliance with the Vora had been forged centuries ago. These temporal echoes were everywhere. A soldier would look at his comrade, and for a heartbeat, see a stranger in their place, a reflection from a different possibility. A historian would look at her data slate and see a history of a peaceful, star-faring race that had never known war. The echoes were disorienting. They were ghosts of choices not made, of futures that now would never be. The bomb had worked. The Vora's timeline was reset. Their warships vanished from your reality. But the act of such a monumental change had sent shockwaves through the structure of causality. You had pulled a single thread. And now you watched as the entire tapestry of existence began to show the strain. You had averted one catastrophe, but you may have created 1,000 new, unpredictable ones. The echoes were a constant reminder of the fragility of your own present. The echoes were just the beginning. The real problem was far worse. The temporal bomb had been a success. Too much of a success. By resetting the Vora's past, you had removed a key piece of the cosmic equation. The elder ones had warned you. A current that is blocked will only grow stronger. The future catastrophe, the great unraveling that the Vora had tried to prevent, was no longer a distant threat. It was here. It was now. Without the Vora's constant pruning of timelines, causality began to spiral out of control. The universe started to fray at the seams. Time itself was becoming an unstable force. The laws of star science were breaking down. A ship's journey that should take an hour might now take 1,000 years, or happen in reverse. The time citadel, your bastion against the chaos, began to feel the strain. The pocket dimension that housed it started to fluctuate. Clocks would run backwards for a few minutes. Objects would appear and disappear without explanation. The very fabric of your last sanctuary was unraveling. The anomaly near Earth had not vanished. It had grown 1,000 times worse. It was no longer just erasing history. It was consuming all possible histories. The neat, linear flow of time was gone, replaced by a chaotic, unpredictable foam of possibilities. You had played a game with the universe, and now the universe was changing the rules in ways you could not comprehend. Your gambit had saved you from the Vora, but it had delivered you to a far more terrifying enemy, the end of time itself. You stood at the precipice of non-existence. The great unraveling was upon you. The time citadel was failing. The universe around you had become a storm of temporal paradoxes. There was only one option left, one final, impossible choice. Your scientists discovered a way to stabilize a single, tiny thread of space-time. But it would come at an unimaginable cost. To save a future, any future, you had to sacrifice your past, all of it. The plan was to use the Citadel's temporal core to perform a final, massive reset. Not on the Vora, but on yourselves. You would erase the existence of the human race up to this very moment. You would cut your own timeline. You would sacrifice every human who had ever lived. Every achievement, every failure, every moment of joy and sorrow. In exchange, you could create a new genesis, a new beginning for humanity. A single seed of life, sent forward into the stabilized future, a future where humanity would exist, but with no memory of the war, the Vora, or the time citadel. They would be a new people, an innocent people. The choice fell to the last remnants of your leadership. To condemn billions who had already lived to utter non-existence. To trade your entire history for a chance at a future you would never see. The debate was short. There was no other way. With a final, silent vote, you made the choice. You would sacrifice your past to save your future. As the Citadel's core began to glow, you looked at the faces of your comrades, the last humans of the old timeline. You had fought a war against an enemy that consumed moments. And in the end, to win, you had to consume your own. The last second ticked away. And in a flash of silent, temporal energy, you were gone, ready for a future to begin,